Hey, it's Alabama Annie with part 25 of the Starlight Tavern, one of my books available on Kindle. Leonard Payne grabbed up his keys and his pistol, and we raced across the road past the store to the barn where the patrol car and the fire trucks were kept. And I was about to get into the car with him when he told me to go and run to get Uncle John and to hurry. So I raced off across the street toward the tavern, rushing up the front steps into the dining room and kitchen, but no one was there. So I went out the back door and found he and Miss Hattie sitting in the porch swing. I raced out the screen door and it slammed behind me. "You have to come. They're hanging Willie Jackson down in the valley at the old store." "Leonard says for you to hurry," I cried, all out of breath, as Miss Hattie reached for me. "How do you know this?" she asked, and I told her Lenny and I had seen it through his binoculars. "Lordy Jesus," she cried, standing up. Uncle John turned to me and said to stay there, but he knew very well that I wouldn't. He ran for his truck and jumped in, and even though he glared at me as I got into the passenger seat, I shut the door as we skidded out the driveway and down the mountain toward Battelle, with Leonard way ahead of us with his red flashing light and his sirens blaring. We drove fast down the mountain, roaring through Sequoia toward the old store. Leonard and Lenny skidded to a halt out front of the store building just as the old man came walking around the building with a jug in his hand. It was the same jug that he had sold Willie, and the man was smiling to himself. Lenny told his dad he'd seen that man bring out the rope. Leonard got out of the patrol car with his pistol drawn. "Take me to him, Virgil," he ordered as the old man raised his hands into the air and spat on the ground. "I ain't taking you nowhere. Down boy tried to rob me," he shouted as Leonard manhandled him across the porch of the store and handcuffed him to the porch railing. Just as Uncle John skidded into the yard, and we stepped out of the truck. And the man sneered at him. "What, now you had to bring him too?" he growled. Before Uncle John could stop me, I raced around the front of the truck and shouted, "We saw what you did. We were watching you," I cried, spitting at him, and before Leonard could stop him, Lenny raced around the car toward the tracks. Leonard and John took off across the field after him, and they all saw Willie hanging there, his thin body swaying in the afternoon breeze from the branches of a chestnut tree. I ran up just as Uncle John and Leonard were cutting Willie down and laid his body in the soft grass beneath the tree as Lenny knelt beside him. After a long silence, while we all stood looking down at poor Willie, Leonard asked his son what kind of a car we'd seen, and Lenny told him that it was a white car with two men inside it. Then he told them to stay there, and he ran back to the store. Leonard arrested Virgil right then and there and uncuffed him from the porch railing and threw him in the back seat of the patrol car. He got in, slammed the door, and drove fast across the field, causing Virgil to bump his head repeatedly on the roof, and he sent Uncle John for his truck. "Thought you might want to take him back," Leonard said as Uncle John wiped his eyes and went for the truck without another word. In a moment, he pulled up beside Willie's body, and Lenny and Leonard and Uncle John laid the boy on a blanket in the back he kept there. Then Leonard followed Uncle John back up the mountain to the jail. The old man glared at Lenny from the back seat as we rode along back up the mountain. When I turned to look at him as he sat with his hands cuffed in the back seat, Lenny said he hoped the old man and the other two men would go straight to hell for what they'd done, and before he could even stop himself, he turned in the seat and glared at the man. "I hope you rot in hell, you bastard," Lenny shouted, as Leonard told him to turn around in the seat and to be quiet. Back on the mountain, they all pulled over at the jail. Leonard yanked Virgil from the back seat of the car and shoved him toward the door of the building and the jail. He hauled Virgil into the musty little used cell and slammed the iron bars behind him so hard that some of the concrete holding the bars fell from the ceiling. Virgil was yelling and screaming that he wanted a lawyer and he had rights when we followed Uncle John across to the morgue. Leonard had Lenny get a gurney and they rolled Willie's body inside. I stood in the hallway and I began to cry. Back in his office, Leonard picked up the telephone and called the sheriff, telling him to come. He hung up and said Lenny and I should stay put right there. He told us to call Miss Hattie and to tell her where we were and what had happened before he and Uncle John went out the door to go and give the Jackson family the horrible news. Just a few moments after they drove away, Edgar Hale, the county sheriff, pulled into the yard and came inside, and we told him Leonard and Uncle John had gone to the Jacksons. Then Sheriff Hale asked us what we had seen and took our statements, asking us a lot of questions, and we told him everything we knew. Leonard and Uncle John loaded up the grief-stricken family, including Miss Effie, and hauled them back with them to the tavern, and then came back for us. And we walked home while Leonard and the sheriff went to interrogate Virgil at the jail. Lenny stoked up the fire in the parlor. Hattie got the children fed in the kitchen and settled into rooms at the end of the hall, and Effie sat beside the hearth, wrapped in her shawl, her eyes locked on those flames. When I brought her some hot tea, she didn't seem to notice me at all, but I saw her mouth was moving, as if she were talking, and I could hear her slightly whisper a word or two here and there, except for a couple of things that sounded like choke. I noticed she held a piece of some plant in her hands. She squeezed its leaves and its stem with her bony fingers, while Buddy and Mr. Harvey went out to the garden and gathered some tomatoes and squash for the dinner. Aunt Mary and Hattie were in the kitchen with Willie's poor mother and that new baby, offering what comfort they could to her, while Uncle John, Edgar, and Leonard stood out on the porch talking in low tones, and the decision was made to leave Virgil where he was instead of transporting him to the county jail. "We'll see that he has some food and he'll be just fine there," Uncle John said, suggesting that they get William Post to go over and keep an eye on the prisoner. Sheriff Hale said he'd like to go over what we'd seen through the binoculars one more time, so Uncle John called us into the tavern office with them. We once again told him everything we had seen, from the time we had arrived on the brow to our scuffles over the binoculars, how we saw Willie come down from the mountain and go into the back of the store building, and how in a couple of minutes he'd come out again with that jug and was headed back toward the mountain again. We told him about the car and the two men, one of them with a rifle, and how they chased Willie across the field and dragged him toward the tracks while the old man came with the rope from the store to hang him. And about that time, we told him the train had come and blocked our view. He asked us more about the car, and I told him it was white with two skinny men inside. Sheriff Hale wrote everything down, adding to his previous notes, and thanked us both again. We went back into the parlor while the sheriff spoke with Buddy, inviting him into the office, asking him why Willie had gone down off the mountain to the store, and Buddy told him it was to get the jug of whiskey for Effie to make a tonic for Willie's mother, who was ailing. Sheriff Hale assumed Buddy knew everything about that, and he told him he would do all he could to catch the two men who chased Willie down and hanged him. Then he and Leonard left to go and question Virgil at the jail. Hattie sent along a half pound of 2-day-old cornbread, some onions, and a few leftover eggs from breakfast. She sure wasn't going to give them give him anything good from her kitchen, no fresh cooked beans or ham. At the jail, they questioned Virgil, who insisted Willie had tried to rob him when he came in to buy the whiskey, and when they asked who the two men in the car had been, he said he'd never seen them before, that they were just some customers. He said he didn't know them. But Sheriff Hale commented that Virgil knew almost everyone around the mountain and in the valley, and told him to come up with the names of those men, or things might not go so well for him.